Hi, I'm Dr. Gemma, and welcome back to Cognitive, the Knitting Psychology podcast. Cheerfully and somewhat irregularly in business since 2008. Segments today may include what's on my hooks, needles, and spindles, a strategy, something I really like, put a lid on it, oh shoot, and blather. So sit back, put your feet up, pick up your knitting, crocheting, spinning, weaving, or dyeing, or any other yarny thing you're doing, and get ready to enjoy. Well, hello there. Happy Sunday evening. As I record this, it's Dr. Gemma, and this is episode 168 of the Cognitive Podcast, and I'm recording this on Sunday, February 4th at 7:52 p.m. And I can tell you right now, this episode is going to be called Mrs. Magoo, and you will find out why. So please be patient, because I'm not sure I can quite see what I'm doing here. But it's okay. It's not bad news. It's just kind of funny in that category of why do these things happen to me, which I'm sure we all participate in. But letting you know right here and now that your comments are very welcome. You can comment on the blog at Cognitive Podcast. Don't forget the K in cognitive.blogspot.com. Or you can go to our group on Ravelry, which I believe is romantically named Cognitive, with the K, of course. In the warm thanks department, I wanted to thank Chris, who liked my bit on reparations in the last episode. I really appreciate that, Chris. And this is, of course, our beautiful Christina, whose Etsy yarn shop is in our list of resources as one of the great indie dyers, because I'm still in love with those socks. At any rate, I have to say, Chris, I really appreciate the feedback, because that was a hard segment to do. I was working on it and thinking about it, and in the midst of it, I suddenly realized, but this is very much a thing from my childhood upbringing, that in other words, there are quite a few theologies, without, getting preachy. There are quite a few theologies, and they're not by any means all Christian theologies, as I think I mentioned, that deal with this issue. But the fact of the matter is, it is just good sense that you can't spend your life in guilt. It's not going to help you in any way. And this comes back to another thing I'll talk about, whether the past is a tool that you use to learn or the past is a whip that you use to beat yourself. So there does just have to be a way to somehow let yourself know that you have made a mistake and you will try to fix it. And you can't always do that as directly with the people you may have hurt as you would like to. So it is a valid part of cognitive behavioral therapy that reparation counts, that you can go back and try to do something in compensation. And, it really gets very Buddhist. You really get in this place of, in one sense, I've put this bad energy into the world, and I can't go directly back to that moment in time and yank that energy back. So I put a compensatory energy into the world. That is a very Buddhist way of thinking in its raw form as I'm describing it. But also that was very much a part of my training in 12 years of theology classes in my schools. And I think anybody who regularly attends temple as Muslim or Jew or Hindu or Buddhist is going to get something similar. I do think the concept of making compensation gets lost in a lot of mainstream religions that are prevalent in America today. I think if you have a sense that you somehow are beyond sin, and this is a very Christian sort of model I'm speaking out of. I don't know how you would say that in like Judaism, but if you have that sense, then reparation gets kind of rubbed out of the picture. So I think that therapy and therapists have a role in bringing that concept back, because I think it's just good for the soul to believe that you can do this kind of exchange. How equal the exchange is going to be, I mean, sometimes it's apples and oranges. There's no way to compare. But I do think to be emotionally healthy, people do need this concept that they can somehow work towards the betterment of themselves after they have made a mistake and after they have moved too far away from that mistake in time or in situation, to be able to go back and fix it at the source. That is, apologize to whomever was directly hurt by it. So thank you for what you said, because it was important to me, because I was trying to get that across. But I don't want to sound like I'm trying to lead anybody to any religious truth. I don't want to go that direction. I think you're all doing just fine. You know, this is about psychology and knitting. It's not about your spiritual path. But there is a lot of crossover. I've been sitting through these classes, you know, from the evolution of psychotherapy. And my very senior colleagues, I mean the guys, and I do mean guys, in their 80s, are now catching up with some of the girls in their 80s, to be fair, and talking about their one regret was that as therapists, they didn't give their patients room to talk about their spirituality. Note, I'm saying spirituality, I'm not saying religion. Although for some people it is the same thing in their head. And it is a very ticklish thing that you can't ignore the spiritual in psychotherapy, is what I have learned. And I enjoy it when my patients talk about it, including when it's not my own. And if I don't agree with what they're saying, my job is not to try to correct or judge or comment. Just to say, oh, okay, so that's what you believe. But it's a ticklish thing, and I did spend a long time last week trying to edit that in such a way that it didn't sound like I was trying to shove a set of religious beliefs down anybody's throat. So much appreciated, Chris. Meanwhile, CFR 10, that is for 2024, the info link is right there, underneath the warm thanks, underneath the opening of the show notes. And all the information is right there. And please, if you have friends who are interested in going to CFR 10, please direct them to that link. Okay? Because I do have a slight hitch. Now that we're getting back into the CFR routine, I get people who are writing to me and saying, can you give me all the details? And really, there's a spot for all those details for a reason. Because again, you know, there's only so much energy and time I'm going to give to this, because I have a full-time job and a family and a farm. And a lot of classes I'm listening to. And so I can't make that kind of commitment, and I'm not raising money on it on top of it. You know, it is always not for profit. So no, I can't answer individually emails like that. So please, if you have friends who want to come to CFR 10, they are more than welcome. Please direct them to that link. It will take them to the info thread on Ravelry. Meanwhile, what's on my hooks and needles? Well, you're never going to believe it. I finally finished Romeo Sweater 2023, which is the old friend's sweater. That I realized that so many of my pets and animals are in it. And it makes me very, very happy. There's a picture of it. This one is extremely difficult to catch the colors in. And I feel very sad that every time I take a picture of it, when you try to get the whole thing into the photo, it looks rather reductionist. You need to see it in real time. The colors are beautiful. Because really what I'm doing, in the sections that are not cream colored, is I'm adding color in every third stitch, and then I stagger the stitches so it looks irregular. There's no real visible pattern. There is a pattern, but I randomized it enough, you know, so it looks very random. So it looks like little bits of jewels sparkling in it. And those are some sari silk yarns that I had in the stash, about a skein and a half. It is unbelievable how far some of these skeins went, let me tell you. And so it's really an amazing sweater. The colors, you have to see it up close. It is a very, very beautiful sweater. So at the very top of the show notes, you can see a picture of it, and it's in lamplight, and so it looks more taupe and brown toned. And you can see the brown parts. It's hard to tell that there is ribbing at the very bottom part that is black, like very, very dark brown to black. And that's, of course, from my 2 alpacas of that same colorway, so to speak. Summer and Jubilee. Jubilee, of course, is still with us out in the back 40 as I speak. And also, so the cream is from my alpaca Rashida and my llama Paz. This was just a blast. This was just a blast. There is definitely commercial yarn in it, probably a little less than 20%. I'm estimating 80 to 90% is hand spun. And this really went bananas on me that I was going to just do it in the browns. And then I said, well, here's this skein of fabulously beautiful color that I hand spun from Fat Cat Knits in 2010. I was in her fiber club, and boy, was that beautiful. Let me tell you, I highly recommend Fat Cat Knits. So I said, well, I'll just do some color work in the yoke, and I'll use the cream. And then I had way more cream than I realized, as you can see. I did not mean to go that low on the body with cream. And design-wise, that was my one error. Was, you may remember me saying, when I was knitting the sweaters by Bad Wolf Girl Knits, her color work goes down the bust and into the body, and I didn't like that look. I like to have just a yoke, and that's what I meant to do. Well, I got carried away. If you're paying very close attention, you get below that main color work yoke, and then there's a stream of color across the bust and the arms. By the way, that's still above the sleeve divide. This came out a little bit long on me to get the dimensions I wanted, so the sleeve divide is actually at the bottom of the cream, which looks well down my arms in these pictures for a reason. Anyway, so if you look at right below the yoke, there's a band of cream, and then there's some kind of piri going across. They're little dogs. They're really tiny. I mean, I think they're like 3 stitches by 3 stitches. And they come out looking like terriers when you're up close. And I thought, well, that's my dog, Gaharis, whom you have never heard about. He's so far back in my history. But he was a little Scottish terrier. And he had a great life, as it turns out, but most of it was not lived with me. But Gary was quite a character. So there's another old friend in the sweater. Overall, the sweater, I believe, has yak in there somewhere. I forget where. Very little bit. And then there's quite a lot of silk in there. There's quite a lot of alpaca in there and a bit of llama. And then there is Shetland wool, particularly the darker browns. And then there are various blends of types of wools in there. There is not cashmere as far as I know. The other thing is, and I am not kidding, that sweater weighs at least 3 to 4 pounds. It is so heavy. This was a bulky weight pattern. And surprisingly, it took me longer than any of my DK weight or worsted weight patterns ever has, but that's because I was doing a lot of blending and mixing and experimenting. So it's hard to explain this pattern, is all I can say, except that it was a blast to make. If I could do it over, I wouldn't change a thing, except I might get rid of those 2 lower color bands on the cream section, where I might bring the darker section up further to replace them. But I have to tell you, I'm very in love with this sweater. And I quite intentionally took it down to darker around the hips and the wrists for, a reason. And I'm so glad to have used up a lot of that Shetland wool. So this thing is really 2 layers. On the outside is what you see. On the inside, it's solid floats, because I was carrying so many yarns until I get to the very, very bottom in those darker bands. This was a lot of fun. And again, the question becomes, why do you do this, Gemma? Like, you have so much commercial yarn, and I do. I easily have 4 or 5 sweaters worth, easily probably somewhere between 4 and 5 or 8 or 9 in commercial yarn. Why do this? Why not just use those first? Knit with your good stuff, etc. And part of it is because I realized this is my good stuff. That my hand spun has a uniqueness to it that no commercial yarn is ever going to match. So that's part of the attraction. Like, look, I'm wearing my friends. And when I realized that, I have to tell you, I had an afternoon where I was teary. All afternoon I was trying not to cry, because I just suddenly realized how incredibly lucky I am. That I'm incredibly fortunate that my life worked out this way. Yeah, part of it was me working for it, and part of it was good luck. Let's be honest here. But it was so weird. I never in my wildest dreams thought I was going to have llamas and alpacas. We bought this farm thinking we were going to get horses, and then we got on the pregnancy project and decided horses might not be a good idea that way because we had too many other things going and our careers were based at a distance. You know, he was going 45 minutes one direction and I was going 30 the other. And somehow the llamas got involved. I don't know why we didn't get goats or chickens, but all of that got mixed in with me learning how to knit and eventually how to crochet and then how to spin. And the upshot is it's just been so incredibly special. And, you know, it's one of those stories where you say life is what happens while you're doing other things. So, you know, this sweater is just a miracle to me in so many ways. And then on top of all of that, there's the option of it's so fun to be confident to a level where I design stuff, where I play with things, and I just can play with it any way I want. And it's enormously, enormously freeing to know that. Now, Myra Wood taught me that. She used to knit in the same knitting group I knitted at down at, I'm trying to remember what it used to be called. Right now, it's the Altered Stitch Cafe. And we used to knit together, and she would always talk about, you should try this, you should try this. And she was always piecing things together and using up scrap yarn in these wildly individualistic and beautiful ways. And I'm so pleased that I finally figured out what she was trying to tell me. So when you do these sweaters, just taking your leftovers and your oddballs and your bits of homespun yarn and making it go together and making it do something that is truly one of a kind and that you never thought you were going to do. This is so special, and it's interesting and it's fun and it's utterly absorbing. So I love that. And there's one more thing, which is I love the tradition. I love saying every year I have Romule, and in Romule I make this one really special sweater. Just like I like at Halloween, I do the Franken socks. You know, in February, I do the vestuary. I just love that. I love having a sense of, oh, this is one of my special knitting traditions. So that's the whole thing there of the Romule, and I hope you like it as much as I do. I don't know if that would be possible because I'm so in love with it. But I was pleased to find out Sustainable Living, I think, was doing one of her own. And I really encourage you, create your own knitting traditions. Have a lot of fun with this. And yes, I just washed my socks today. I will throw that picture in here. And I realized, you know, Gigi was saying to you, Gigi Knitmore, you should have a month of socks. And I do easily. And I thought, I have too many socks. Not really, but I've got a little more than a month now. But I thought, you know, it is always so much fun to just knit these little things and have them around. And every so often, if you have too much, you give them to a shelter. So, yes, I'm looking at 2 of my sweaters and wondering if they should be going onto the shelter list next year. But we will see. The point is, you have fun with your knitting because you can always give it to someone somewhere. There's always someone who needs something warm and woolly. If you're a crocheter, something warm and acrylic-y. There's always a taker. So by all means, have fun with the knitting and experiment. And you know, I could go down the path that the Twin Set ladies went, where they became just expert knitters. They did the master knitter courses, and they do these incredible, I think it's called boho stuff, that their stuff is so professionally finished and beautiful. And then I realized that's not the direction I want to go, that I'm really having much more fun experimenting with my own stuff. So set up your traditions and have a good time, I guess, is the point of all this. And if you look down in the notes, you'll see I have the unfinished picture. I have one sleeve finished and one sleeve about 2/3 of the way done because I want you to see the colors there. And you get a better idea of the colors, but it's just very hard to see the colors in this sweater. And I don't care. I'm so in love with it. By the way, I'm not wearing it right now. It's in the bathtub because also some of that yarn smelled very much like a farmyard. There was a lot of vegetable matter in it still, even though I spun it and I washed it. And so I just thought, okay, this baby has to go into a bath. The other thing is, when I was starting it, there were all these bundles of hand-spun yarn around me, and a moth flew by and Minerva caught it. And I did some moth homework, and I said, do I have moths? And I still haven't answered that question, but you should benefit from my moth homework. So I have a link there under finished. It says Rome Mule Sweater 2023, and that's one link for the Ravelry notes. But then there's another link that says moth info. So if you want some updating on how to manage moths, I offer you this. And yes, I am going to work on this to demoth it. Now, one of the things I did when I got hit by moths about 10 years ago was I started putting everything in sealed plastic bins, and that's worked really well. So I'm looking at that one moth and thinking, is it possible there were still some eggs alive? But there was no moth damage on these yarns that I saw. So, I decided in the end the trick here is just to bake some of the yarn, because if you did not know it, the ignition point of sheep's wool is 1,000 degrees. Effectively, it has no ignition point, doesn't burn. So you can bake it, and if you put it in the oven at 120, they say, and my oven only goes down to 170, but my thing is just put it in the oven, turn the oven on its lowest, and leave it, count the time that your oven is warming up as part of the time you're moth killing. But even at 170 degrees, nothing's going to happen to the sweater. Sure, I'll be testing that with a few samples of yarn before I do it, but I will be working on that with this collection of yarn because I am concerned that I saw that moth. Weirdly today, I put the sweater on, showed it to my husband, had him take some pictures. I walked back in here, and a moth came down the hallway. And I'm thinking, okay, I don't know where that puppy came from. It just promptly died on my floor. So I don't know what's going on, but I am going to moth treat the sweater and all the wools that are still associated with it, because I don't want to have that problem again. It turns out the moth treatment isn't that hard, and you can read all about it if you go to the moth info link in the show notes. That will eventually make its way into my group of links on Ravelry where I keep information that you might need. In the meantime, in progress. Well, here's the other good news. You know the Rome Mule sweater? Yeah, try 23 skeins of yarn. And they were all sizes. I mean, there were skeins that were like 500 or 600 yards. There were skeins, there was one that was, I think, 60 yards. So I feel good about this. So now the stash toss is at 0 skeins in versus 24 skeins out. So that makes me feel good. That's a definite nice jump in the stash toss. And let me tell you, when you take 24 skeins out of even my stash, you can see the difference. So I am redistributing yarns and cleaning out yarn bins because I have all my quilt scraps to put in them. But even so, I am pretty happy about this. Meanwhile, the 5th CFR 23 sock yarn cowl, you can see a picture of where it is now. It's not very far along. It just sits on my desk. If I get a minute or two between patients, I'll hook part of a row. But this is a crochet project, and I am loving it. For those of you who are counting, I'm still looking at the crocheted cat sweater that I mentioned a few weeks ago. There's also the latest picture of the first Stash Dive 1 sock. This is, of course, Yawool, as I'm using the Americanized version of the name, in the colorway Sedona in their sock yarn. And I just love this. This is just beautiful to have in your hands. The colors are breathtaking. And if you have never been to the Red Rock country of Arizona, I love Sedona, the town. I love it. And if you've never been there, you need to go, because Sedona, well, you just have to see it, and you have to experience it, because it's an energy. Yes, I really did say that, as well as insanely beautiful colors and landscape. And of course, the ultimate, not very far north of it, is the Grand Canyon, which is one of those things that it just, like, I could sit here all day trying to describe it. You have to see it. It is a huge experience. But once you see these things, you will know why these socks are spectacular if the colorway itself wasn't enough. Meanwhile, Vestuary 24, we are in February, 4 days in as I record this. And I'm happy to say that I did finish my 4 inches of 1x1 rib after ripping it back last week. And I am now on to the stockinette, not very far, 2 or 3 rows in. But I am one happy camper. This is the easy part where you just go up to the armpits. I think it's 12 or 13 inches. I have to go look at my schematic for myself. And then when you get to the armpits, since I'm knitting in the round, I put half the stitches on scrap yarn. And then I go up the back, which is really easy, but now it's back and forth. And then you go up the front in a V-neck. And then you sew those 2 little seams at the shoulders, and then you add your ribbing around the neck and the armpits. It's a very, very easy project, very, very fun. The best part is it is so much popcorn knitting. Really easy and pleasant. And that's using the Knitter's Handy Book of Patterns, of course. And that link is in my knitting resources, or if it's not, I'm going to go stick it in there, because I just think everybody needs a copy of that book. This is by Ann Budd, and if you want to do bottom-up sweaters, bottom-up vests, mitts, gloves, fingerless scarves, I mean, it is just a book of what they used to call monster patterns, fitted to almost every size, and I can't recommend it enough. That, and I can't think, the Sweater Handbook, I think, by Jacqueline Fee. 2 of the books I would say if you're going to knit sweaters you probably should see. Ironically, I knit almost all my sweaters top down, but yet I love that book. I love Ann Budd's book. I just do. And she still likes everything I make out of it on Ravelry. She goes and finds it and puts a like heart. Bless you, Ann, you're a goddess. Okay, and there you can see, after you get to Vestuary, you can see the Pennsylvania Dutch embroidery link. And also you will see that I've started another pair of socks. These are Deep Stash Dive 2. Now you knew I would do this. I talked before about how I found my oldest skein of yarn that I know of, which is Lime and Violet sock yarn, and I think it's from 2007. That's the year after my kid was born. I did not even know how to knit socks, but I wanted to buy from them because I was listening to their podcast, and I was such a fangirl. Who knew I would do this podcast, really? At any rate, well, I pulled it out and I wound it one night because it was kind of low bandwidth. So I just sat there with this skein untwirled in my lap and wound it by hand into a big ball, and you knew that couldn't last. So I started doing 5 rows a night of the ribbing on sock number 1. Well, 4 nights later, there I am on stockinette, but that's about as far as I've gotten. I've got like 2 rows of stockinette. I decided I'm going to do this in the blueberry waffle sock pattern. I have to go back and change my entry on Ravelry. And it looks spectacular because it is a stripe, but it's got very short repeats. Like the repeats take up one side of the sock, you know, half the stitches on each row. And I just decided, rather than have another splotchy sock, I'm going to try to do the blueberry waffle sock, and it does look pretty spectacular. It is a sad thing because this is a very spectacular colorway. It's very unusual. It's silver and pink and cream, and it's very handsome. But anyway, we'll see how that goes, but I'm not really giving it much time or love. I want to get through the Stash Dive 1 socks in the beautiful Sedona. Nothing in the spinning world, really. I had wanted to ply up the Minerva spun, but I didn't get the mojo. So she's not going to make it into that sweater, into the old friend sweater. Meanwhile, that's Dizzy Blondes too. I've got the links, of course, to the books I use, which is a library of patterns. It says a knit crochet library. And there's my favorite resources to buy. Those are things I buy to support my habits of knitting and crocheting and all that, weaving, whatever, spinning. And then there is the Yarn Skills and Techniques link. So there's just 3 links in the middle there for references, you know, things I talk about you might want to go look up. So that takes us on to the strategy. And again, we've been talking about perfectionism, and I touched on this last time, and that is just like me. When you're trying to get past your own perfectionism, you have to hit this base understanding that when you say you are perfect, or when you try to be perfect, you are not only trying to be perfect, but you are denying your humanity. You're denying your connection with everybody else who isn't perfect. In other words, you're going to be a goddess or a god, depending on the person listening here, and the rest of us are just paltry humans making mistakes. And of course, that's very alienating, that's isolating for you, and it's just a little bit, well, snobby. All right. The important thing, though, is you need that link to other people. And you need it in your relationships. that certainly if you're going to have a lifelong intimate relationship with a partner or spouse, you can't be on the perfectionism binge. You'll never be able to get along with anybody else if you're clinging to that perfectionism, because you have to realize that your partner is going to make mistakes. And if you're going to commit to them for life, you're going to be forgiving mistakes. And they're going to be doing the same for you. And you can't have a relationship on an unequal footing where you're perfect and they're not. It isn't going to work. And ironically, that's been researched. Not quite in this guise, but there was a wonderful guy doing research in Seattle in the 90s, the psychiatrist. And he was able to identify couples who were going to fail in their marriage right at the time they got engaged, just by a 5-minute interview. He got really good at this. He had over 90% success, apparently. And the reason was he would talk to them, and if they were showing contempt to each other, or if one of them was showing contempt visibly to the other's face in the session, the psychologist said that will, pardon me, I can't remember if he was a psychologist or a psychiatrist. Anyway, the clinician said that will kill the love. And it does. So why would you be showing contempt to your partner? You are a perfectionist and you are in the phony mindset that you are perfect and they are not. It will destroy the relationship. Take it from me. I do this for a living. Curiously, people will come in and say, I want to divorce my partner. And they just want individual therapy with me. They don't want to do the couples thing. And I can't give advice. I'm neutral. They have to make that decision for themselves as an adult. But I am listening for that. I am thinking about, are you talking about this person with contempt? And did you ever have a time in your marriage where you didn't talk about them that way? I am listening for, like, do I think this is a good idea? But again, remember, it's my job to be neutral, that I only step out of that if I believe there's clear abuse. And then we're on a rescue mission, you know. But again, this is something the patient has to decide. Even when I do think it's abuse, as long as there's not child abuse or elder abuse or the abuse of a dependent adult, all of which I must report. If those things aren't present, if it's just two people being hard on each other, my opinion isn't worth spit. The individual has to make their own decision, and I don't want to have the pressure of influencing it. It's more like, talk out your ideas with me, but you're going to make the call. But we do see it. We do see people who come in and they are contemptuous of their partner, and it doesn't work. We have the research to back it. So you have to be on a level with your partner. To do that, you adopt the Buddhist logic of just like me. Now, the Buddhists talk about it in terms of, what do you do when you're angry? So you're driving and someone cuts you off and you honk and they give you the finger and, you know, you're doing road rage with them or they're doing it with you. And you have to keep saying to yourself, but they're really not this way, that they are just like me. I have cut people off. I have even, yes, I have given them the finger when I've gotten angry. We all make juvenile mistakes. We all can let our anger carry us a little far. Okay? So when you see somebody and they're hurting you, the temptation is to say, this is who they are. They are just evil. They are just mean. They deserve punishment. And then, of course, if we're really not onto it, we start trying to be the one to bring the wrath of the divine, as it were, upon them. That, oh yeah, not only do they deserve punishment, but I've decided I'm going to be the little avenging angel here. Now, that's not good and it's not safe. As one of my trainers who was a cop used to say, you know, people do carry guns in their cars. Yeah, welcome to America. It isn't safe to take vengeance on somebody else in that kind of situation. And one of the ways you handle it is you say, they're just like me. They're probably not intending to cut me off. They may not even realize they did it. If they did know, like me, they would probably be embarrassed or ashamed of themselves. They'd probably apologize if they could. That you have to try to look at other people when they hurt you, and instead of maneuvering them into this mental space of they're evil and they meant to do this, you have to look at them instead and say, they're just like me. I've done that too. On a bad day, I could do what they're doing. Maybe they're having a bad day, and maybe they are. You don't know. Maybe their kid's in the hospital and they're trying to get there. Kids in the ER and the doctor just called. You don't know what's going on. You don't know why they're doing what they're doing in my example. And you rarely do in life when people hurt you. There's very few people who are intentionally evil. Most people are just being forgetful, clumsy, kind of unthinking. That doesn't mean they are always that way, just like me. And when you can do that, it is surprisingly great. When I started to practice it, I realized I was letting go of stuff faster. One of the things I hear all the time is, I can't let go of my painful stuff. I can't let go of my anger. This is the Buddhist answer, and it is a darn good answer, just like me. Do I mean to be cruel and unkind to people? No. Well, they probably don't either. And I'm sometimes cruel and unkind, but it's not my intention. So it's probably not theirs either. They are just like me. So when you stop ascribing malicious intention to people, it's incredibly helpful. And of course, the flip side is when you can start that kind of letting go and forgiving, you're going to start doing it for yourself, on yourself. Why? Because you're saying they're just like me. You're admitting in the whole situation that you too are imperfect. You too make poor decisions and make mistakes. And when you are practicing that towards other people, you're kind of doing feedback on yourself. And so you're very slowly teaching yourself about yourself as well. They are just like me. I can let go of this. I don't have to carry painful memories of how this person did something mean to me. I can simply say I might do the same on a bad day, just like me. And as you do that, you begin to let go of anger at other people, and you begin to also acknowledge and adapt to the idea that you are also making mistakes as you go. And that's the value of just like me. The great Milton Erickson, he's a master of psychotherapy, and his huge contribution was non-directive hypnosis, which I've probably talked about elsewhere by this point, after all these years podcasting. If I haven't, I apologize. If you're interested, let me know. But the absolutely wonderful Milton Erickson, when he was dying, he had polio, and I think he was having strokes. And one of the last things he said was an acolyte of his, knowing he could not talk, said, "Dr. Erickson, in one word, what is the common problem of all mental health?" And Erickson whispered, rigidity. And that is key, that all mental illness is based on the sufferer is rigid around something. Depression, everything is bad and I can't fix it. Anxiety, the world is out of control and I can't act enough to fix it. Psychosis, everybody is out to get me and there is no other way to look at it. By the way, no, that is something you have to chemically correct. I don't mean to say that in psychosis just an act of will change it. Although surprisingly, some acts of will do help it a startling amount. That was the late Aaron Beck's last work, and it is pretty amazing stuff. But all mental health issues are about broken relationships. Because I am rigid, I cannot get help. How would I get help? I would relate to other people. Perfectionism is a rather dangerous kind of rigidity. By making yourself into this model of perfection that you can never possibly live up to, you lose the ability to love other people and to be in relationship with them. And your self-love turns into this kind of fragile self-hate. So one of the great tools against perfectionism is just like me. Looking at other people and saying to yourself, they are just like me. I am just like them. Shoot, yes, I continue cycling my 20 minutes a day. I did take a day off yesterday because I was running around all day and I was just plain tired and said, missing one day in a month is okay. My normal schedule when I was running was actually, I ran every other day. So I did take rest days. I'm not cycling hard enough to do that, but I have kind of loosened up to the idea. Every now and then I'll probably miss one just due to timing or circumstances. Fluffy books. Well, this is more fluffy TV. Netflix has been known to do a series of really strange docudramas, like documentaries that they partially dramatize. This is a trend I hate. However, every now and then I get sucked into one. They're currently running one about Alexander the Great. I do not know enough about Alexander to know how to judge this. What surprises me, and the reason I did watch the first episode, is I had no idea that we knew so much about Alexander. That's really remarkable considering how long ago the guy lived. You don't expect a lot of records from that time. I mean, we have more on Alexander the Great than I think we have on Shakespeare, if you exclude Shakespeare's own writings, which, by the way, are not particularly autobiographical in our sense of the word. However, the Alexander the Great, the first episode, it's called Alexander, was very interesting. It's very worth watching. You've got to kind of skip over the dramatic parts that are kind of tedious. My one complaint is they put a lot onto his mother. And there's this weird thing that a male professor once pointed out to me about women in history, and that is, these are cultures where women have very little power unless it's in the bedroom and subversion. And it's interesting because these cultures that are so massively misogynist and male-dominated, somehow there's always that one woman who ruined everything. And it turns out to be Alex's mom, which is pretty hard to get. Now, what am I talking about? Alexander's father, Philip of Macedon, he had his first wife was Alexander's mother, and she did real well because her first baby was the heir, was Alexander. But as Alexander matured and she aged, Philip took other wives, and he took this young wife almost right before his death, and he was really excited about her, clearly, trying to make heirs on her, only had a daughter with her before his death. And they always play up how jealous Alexander's mother was of this woman, which, okay, I mean, maybe that's kind of believable, but it turns into this whole espionage story because Philip and Alexander have a falling out where Philip praises one of his generals in such a way that Alexander is embarrassed. I'm not going to go into it. Alexander leaves the country. He goes on a self-imposed exile to Illyria, neighboring kingdom, hangs out for a while with his buddies, comes back at Philip's invitation. And Philip says, come to this wedding reception for your sister. And he says, we'll patch it up. And he does make a show of patching it up. And then in the middle of the reception, one of his bodyguards stabs Philip to death. And the question is, why? Because that bodyguard would know he'd be executed immediately. And the interesting thing is that gets blamed on Alex's mother. And the question is why? Well, first of all, the bodyguard, why would he do this? He has to believe someone will spare him. So who put him up to it? And everybody goes, oh, Alexander's mother. There's no real evidence. It's just one of those, she probably did it because she was watching out for her son. Makes no sense. Makes more sense that Alexander did it because then he could become king, because there's this other stepmother, as it were, one of his father's wives, who's making babies with daddy. And she's had one, just really before Alex can get back from Illyria. And I think it makes a lot of sense to think Alexander's taken out insurance that she doesn't make a son who will be preferred over him. And there's still that sore spot with the general. Well, shortly after Philip's murder, Alexander takes over. He spends a lot of time trying to quell opposition in Macedon, which of course makes you think they all believe he arranged the killing. They don't just fall into line behind the oldest son of the late king. So while he's doing that, he has the general who insulted him, that made him go to Illyria. Well, he voluntarily went to Illyria. That guy's in the field, and the Persians try to bribe him. And the general makes a show of loyalty to Alexander, who has the guy executed in front of his own troops. So, it's hard not to get this picture of Alexander as being utterly ruthless and out to prove that he will brook no opposition in taking over Macedonia. And so, again, this is one of those moments where you go, why are we blaming the mother again? And you see it again in Roman history with the wife of Augustus. Everybody blames Livia for the nasty things Augustus did when he was emperor, which is pretty weird when you consider the nasty things Augustus did before he married Livia, and so on. As one of my history teachers said, You know, the more histories you read, the more there's this weird temptation to vilify these women who really had very little power in these very sexist, misogynist systems. That's my gripe here about this show. That again, it's like, oh, I don't know, man. I don't honestly believe that bodyguard of King Philip thought that he was safe being protected by Philip's aging first wife. But I do think he'd feel safe if he had the protection of Alexander, the heir to the throne. And so, you know, chancy history, however, compared to some of Netflix's other ones, the Roman ones, I watched them, but they're just, I mean, you just sat there going, that's wrong and that's wrong. So, you know, I can't recommend this, but it was interesting. That's all I'm going to say. In the meantime, something I really like, well, if you look, you will see that I have laid out 4 strips of the rolled cedar planking to make the wider part of our path there because we have so much overgrowth on the path. I am going to cut all that back, but I wanted to make that path wider because what you're not seeing is those planks are laid over what turns into a sea of mud at this time of year. And so now we definitely have a walkway even without me trimming the plants. And if you look carefully, you will see that I've put the solar lights in there with the help of my beloved son. A lot of fun working with him on this. The interesting thing about that, the thing I really like too, are those solar lights. Although I'm pretty happy with that planking, let me tell you, I have pins driven into it, and I continue every day to drive 10 more pins in, and we have another roll of the planking and more pins, and then it will be done. I'm reaching the end of that space, but I am loving the solar lights. When I first put up solar lights, and it's been a long time, and the weather eventually destroyed them, and it's a long story, but we let it happen. They were very expensive. It was like 20 bucks a light. Well, this was a 12-pack for 23 bucks, and they worked just fine. We got them. One was not working well, and it does not seem to be working, we suspect. Strangely, it's the one farthest from the house. It's the very last one in line, so it's easy to identify. Apart from that, though, the price was right. These things are very inexpensive now, and they're really doing the job. We were shocked when I put them out with my son's help. They had maybe half an hour of light, and we came home and they were glowing brightly. We really, really like this. So this is turning into a very happy project. Now, any kind of edging I want to put along them to enhance the attractiveness, I don't know. But right now you can see the walkway, and I am in love with those solar lights. Put a lid on it. Well, still working on the Plum Deluxe Advent Calendar. I missed a few days when I came home and got COVID, so it gets a little irregular here, but you can see day 18. This is an interesting one. This is Chestnut Cream Decaf Black. And I like this. Strangely, it put decaf black tea and rooibos in it. I can't imagine why you'd put those two things in together. Nonetheless, it makes for a good flavor. And this is strongly flavored of chestnut. They use chestnut pieces and chestnut and vanilla essences. The vanilla is very subtle. It's got a strong chestnut flavor. It's hard to describe that to Americans. Most of us have not had chestnuts in my experience. It's a thing, it's a yes-no switch. You like it or you don't like it. I'm okay with it. I happen to really enjoy hot peeled chestnuts on the streets of London. I'm just saying. I mean London in the UK, not London, Ontario. Haven't been to London, Ontario yet. But this is a yes-no switch. If you like chestnut, you'll probably like this. I'm okay with chestnut. I wouldn't go out of my way to have it in my tea. Again, I've told you I'm not a fan of nut flavors in my tea. I can take them or leave them. They're not bad, but I'm not going to go out of my way to buy them. So this was pleasant without being anything hysterically exciting for me. And then there was day number 20, which I cannot drink, but I did put the picture in to show it to you. This sounds lovely, but it's pear walnut herbal. And it would be great, except it's got alfalfa leaf in it, and I am allergic to alfalfa, let me tell you. Now, you may remember, a while back, I think it was day 17, I foolishly drank the tea. I can't remember, it was my last day at Evolution, and it had lavender in it. And as I was walking to the bus stop, my throat started closing. Fortunately, it didn't go too far. A few swigs of it in a cup weren't enough to really trigger me, but it did teach me the lesson. So I did not drink day number 20. In fact, it's sitting over by my tea service, by my sink in the big bathroom, in the bathtub area. And I didn't drink this one. So I can't say anything about it except I like pear flavoring in tea. You may remember I'm fond of their pear cinnamon. So I would say my guess is I would like it. Now, this is another nutty flavor. And again, walnut in a tea does nothing for me, but it sounds good. Pear walnut. Like if it didn't have this in it, I definitely would have tried it. And I do like a strongly pear-scented tea and the flavor in the tea. So you might want to try that if it's still available over on the Plum Deluxe site. Alas, I cannot. On to the blather. Yeah. Okay, I'm down getting oil put in my car. What day was this? I guess, I can't remember, I think it was Thursday morning, I think. No, Thursday I went and got my eyes examined. I think it was last Sunday. Anyway, I'm getting oil put in the car. My glasses just disintegrated on my face. I was like, what? Now, fortunately, the lenses held together in the frame, and I also had my sunglasses, and it was sunny. And so I drove home with my sunglasses. When in strong need, I can use my glasses lenses. But I have been without glasses for a few days. Let me tell you something. My doctor put my first glasses on me when I was 6 months old. I have never had a time in my life like this. 63 years, give or take a few months. And I have never gone without glasses. So when I drive on those rare events, I have to have it be sunny out so I can wear my sunglasses. This has been very weird, to put it mildly. Like knitting socks, much more challenging. Now I could just run over and get reading glasses. And in the end I may have to, but I'm hoping, because that was a week ago today that they disintegrated. And on Thursday morning, fortunately, I was able to get an eye exam at a new place I'd never been to, America's Best. Turns out, great eye exam. Much, much better than anything I've had in a long time, including Blue Shield's eye exam and also, what's the other one? Lens Crafters. This woman was great. Good exam. She was very clear, took a lot of time to explain things to me. And I trust her prescription because I was having trouble with my last 2 prescriptions. And she looked at them and she said to me before I brought that up, she said, "Are you having trouble with these?" And I said, "Why do you ask?" And she said, "These are too strong for you." And she said, "They're significantly too strong for you." And I said, "Oh." And so we'll see. But this time I did not go for progressive lenses. I decided instead that I'm done with that rodeo. So I'm just getting 2 sets of the plain lenses for my typical day vision, and then I'm getting 1 set of reading glasses. As I was thinking of this, I'm sitting in the eye place, and there's a guy my age, he's like 2 years older than me, and we got talking, and I said, you know, this is what I'm thinking of. And to my surprise, he said, I gave up on progressive lenses. It's just too crazy. It's not worth it. And you damage them, and you've just lost $1,500 worth of glasses. Mine usually costs $1,100 to $1,400, depending on the frame. And he said, you know, I just gave it up. And he said, I used to buy the reading glasses at the pharmacy, and my doc talked me into getting reading glasses here that they can fine-tune it better. And to be honest, the cost was so low. All right, so I am used to, for 1 pair of progressive lensed and frames, I'm used to paying about $1,100. I got 2 pairs of regular glasses and a pair of reading glasses, all prescription, $388. You know, okay, so I'm pretty happy. I'm really relieved because I have to tell you, every time I buy new glasses, I'm going into debt for a few months. This was really nice to just buy it and, you know, be able to pay it off relatively quickly. So we'll see how that goes. And I'm perfectly happy because I have all my chain materials that I was using when I was making all the chatelaines. And I just realized I'm just going to make glasses holders for myself. And I will get something I like because I do it myself. But right now, I am Mrs. Magoo. If you don't get the reference, go Google it. Meanwhile, everything else, well, I told you, I just am still working on that pathway. I am still cutting the strips for my quilts. Can you believe I have this much fabric? I haven't done it in a few days, and that's part of the reason, but I just have a ton of fabric left to get through cutting into strips. And I think I have finished cutting apart all the outgrown t-shirts so far, so that makes me happy. And meanwhile, it's pouring rain out there. We're not putting up the garage camera yet. The dogs are just great. Not much else to report. We are just in that quiet time of the year, and I have to tell you, it was delightful to have a rainy weekend this weekend. We did manage to sneak out for sushi yesterday, I must tell the truth here. But basically, I committed to finishing the Romule sweater this weekend, and I realized I could do one sleeve a day and get this baby done. And I did, and I'm really, really happy about that, let me tell you. On the calendar, and I have the dates for our local stitching groups, the Yarnopoly and Second Saturday Stitchers. Another one that is crochet oriented swam across my ken. They are also down in the Santa Clarita Valley. And also, I did add to the calendar, finally, the information on the Sit and Stitch group at the Joanne Darcy Library. This is all in the Santa Clarita Valley. The Darcy Library, well named, eh? All you Jane Austen fans. It's on the edge of Santa Clarita in Canyon Country. CFR 10 will be on September 28th, 2024 at the Courtyard by Marriott in Valencia, same hotel as last year. You can call them up and make your reservations. I hope you will. Very excited about that. And nothing new in that department that I can think of right now, except I think I told you I'm taking Friday the 27th off. So hopefully I will get there early on the Friday and really get a little more time to wind down from patients and relax a little more and let myself kick back and enjoy it. But I hope y'all are coming. Romule, of course, somewhere between December 21st and January 1st of 2024-25. We shall see. That would be rather a few extra days more. Usually I get about 10 days there. I think that's going to be more like 12 or 13. We will see how that goes. Below that, I have my collection of, those are all knitting images and memes that you can take, you can use. And finally, Minerva gets the last word. You can see her, and she is lying on my big bed with Captain. You can guess which is which there, although it's hard to see them because they're both coal black. And they are lying on an extremely bright blanket, the blanket's own blanket, in fact, that I crocheted all last year. And because the blanket is so bright, it's messing with the camera, which is thereby making the two black-coated animals darker than they normally would be. I messed with it as much as I could, but there was just no way to see detail on my two pets. But there is Minerva lying, butt to butt with Captain. They are quite companionable with each other. They greet each other nose to nose. They are friendly. Captain occasionally gets led astray when Queenie comes in the house, because Queenie is still in that puppy phase where she wants to play with Minerva, and she'll chase her and try to invite her to play, and Minerva, of course, interprets it as a very clumsy attack. Minerva's very patient about it. She does not scratch at either of the dogs, no matter how fractious or bumptious our collie Queenie is getting. So Minerva wants you to know that you should know your friends. Or in the language of this episode, Minerva is lying there looking at Captain and saying, just like me. On that happy note, everybody remember, flu is going around, COVID's going around, get your shots because we are a community. If you're not going to get your shot for yourself, what are you thinking? No, if you're not going to get your shot for yourself, remember that when you get a shot like that, you're taking care of the community. And the community, of course, when we take care of it, we ourselves are protected by that. So everybody, please stay safe, take care of each other, and I will talk to you soon. Bye-bye. So we have come to the end of another episode of Cognitive. Please do not use this podcast to diagnose yourself. If you think you are having a mental health problem, please contact a licensed mental health professional. Show notes for these episodes can be found at cognitivepodcast, all one word, .blogspot.com. Episodes can be found at iTunes under the name Cognitive Podcast, but also can be found posted next to the show notes on the Blogspot page. Thank you so much for listening. Everybody, stay safe, take care of each other, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.